Hey, fabricators, and welcome to another Advancing Fabric News Roundup, brought to you by Advancing Analytics, your Spark and Lakehouse experts. Now, if you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And today I am joined once again by my co-fabricator, Johnny. Hey, Johnny.
Hey, fabricators.
So when we were doing our Ignite roundup, we promised a deeper dive into the November news because there was so much in there. So that's what we've got for you today. We're going to go through all of the kind of announcements that are in there. We'll pick out some of our favorite ones that we want to look at and talk a bit more about. So shall we kick this off, Johnny? Because there's a lot to get through, isn't there?
It is a lot to get through. Let's dive in.
Great. So I think you're going to kick us off by running through some of these kind of early ones if we run through the list.
Yeah, so the first heading there under core, we've got this Microsoft Fabric User API. Now, throughout this month's announcement, you're going to see lots and lots of references to APIs being made available, and this is great news. It means that certainly from an infrastructure as code perspective, you've now got APIs available to sort of help manage items within your Fabric workspaces. That means you can create items, you can create things like notebooks, lake houses, semantic models. There are some where you can list so that you can sort of catalog what's there. You've got other items where you can execute things like Spark job definitions and things like that. It just means with these APIs now available, you'll be able to bake those into things like CI/CD processes. If you're building things like solution in a box type solutions, we can automate creation of some of those items in there. So yeah, really good news for people like us that are building out solution accelerators for Fabric.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really exciting from an automation perspective. And if you want to, there's some sample code here that will take you all the way over to GitHub, and you can kind of pick up the code and have a play about with it, and they kind of help you along just so that you can get used to how to use it. So that's really interesting. What about Power BI updates?
Yeah.
There's always quite a lot in here, isn't there?
Yeah, there's loads, and there's so many this month as well. So first up, we've got the new button slicer that's now available. So there's a core visuals team that have been working on trying to improve some of the visualization experiences in Power BI. The button slicer is one of the big items on their roadmap. So there used to be a custom visual called the chiclet slicer that used to let you create visuals or create slicers using images, which is pretty cool. This new button slicer that's now available in Power BI Desktop natively gives you that functionality, but gives you tons of other formatting settings as well. So you can really make sort of really slick looking slicers.
Yeah.
You can see there some really great examples where you can have titles as well as images and things like that. So it just adds a little bit of polish to those visuals. There's also this reference labels feature that's been added. So this is, as opposed to it being a new feature on its own, it's part of the new card visual. So I actually gave a talk on the new card visual at Data Weekender a couple of weeks back. And that's already out of date because they've added more features, because that's what Power BI does. But in particular, these reference labels effectively allow you to not only create a card with a KPI in it, but those reference labels allowed you to add extra details and extra pieces of context and points of reference. So for example, and again, you can see on some of these great examples here, if you're sort of showing a KPI that might be your overall revenue, then you can show almost like subheaders that will sort of show things like change year over year. So just another good opportunity to add more context to the slices there. Again, we've got sort of news around Copilot. So Copilot's going to be absolutely everywhere. So that's going to start enhancing things like Q&A suggestions. We've got more updates on object interactions. So on object interactions is the new like UI experience for when you're building visuals in Power BI. That continues to evolve on a regular basis.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah.
Again, we've got things like being able to aggregate data points over Azure maps. Again, more Copilot features being added in terms of the narratives. Quite a big one is the fact in the modeling tab there, you've got data sets now renamed to semantic models. So fair few people upset about this change. But yeah, a Power BI data set is now called a Power BI semantic model. Data sets always were semantic models if you're going to talk about them conceptually as a data professional, and now they have just made that a more formal labeling of it. The next one, DAX query view, to write and run DAX queries on your model, is a really interesting one. So if you jump across to my screen, I've got a quick demonstration of what that actually means. So I've got Power BI desktop open here, and I've got a data model already loaded. What you'll see if you coming on the left hand side here, you've got a new tab available. So we've always had the report tab, data tab, and model tab. We've now got a DAX tab. So if we come into this, it lets you write DAX queries, and writing DAX queries lets you test. So yeah, here is one I made earlier. I'm taking this existing data model. Let's run this and get some results. So this is great from a debugging perspective and sort of a workflow that I've always traditionally done using DAX Studio, but now you've got this facility baked into Power BI itself. So especially if you work somewhere where they don't really like you using third-party tools, it is here now. You can write DAX queries in there. So one thing that I tend to do when I'm testing with DAX queries is maybe if I'm trying to do some optimization, I might play around with a few bits and bobs here. So for example, I've got this DAX query here, looking at this year's quantity, last year's quantity, and I've been playing around a bit with some different patterns for doing time intelligence. So rather than just using the regular same period last year function, I was messing about with offset functions instead. And so what I can do is I can add this test measure into here, give that a run, look at it and see that, fantastic, that different syntax gives me the same results, which is good. That's what I was looking for. I'm just going to bring in this at a different granularity, and then at a different granularity, actually it didn't work. So that was a rubbish measure, which I should ditch and not add to my model. Interestingly, though, from a workflow perspective, if you do write yourself a test measure and you decide, brilliant, that's what I wanted to do, you can literally, from this screen, add it into your model, which is really, really, really...
Yeah, so it's just it's kind of making that developer flow and the ability to kind of test and work with things just that little bit smoother then,
Yeah, 100%, really good. As I say, in the past, you'd have to have done this with third-party tools.
So what else have we got on the cards under Power BI? Moving into the data connectivity component. Anything exciting here, or is it kind of a lot of your usual kind of updates to things?
Yeah, so on the connectivity front, there's always updates and always things that are chopping and changing. I guess from one that's slightly interesting is the Prophecy connector. I don't know if people have come across Prophecy. Back in the old on-premise days, you used to have master data services as part of sort of the old SQL Server stack. And when things started moving to the cloud, we didn't really have an equivalent of master data services. So Prophecy, who are a third-party vendor, have kind of emerged as the de facto MDS replacement in the cloud. And it's great to see Microsoft supporting Prophecy connector so that you can get to that master data in your Power BI solution if you want.
So we've got some new components and everything under the service area, and then also visualizations.
Service front, there's a really, really cool thing, Explore, a new preview feature, which I think is worth diving in on.
I think this one came up recently when we were talking and you'd mentioned it and I just drew a blank. It's not something that I saw, or not something that I was aware of at the time, but yeah, like it sounds really exciting from what you told me.
Yeah, again, it's one of those announcements that kind of got a little bit lost in all the Ignite excitement, I guess. So once again, if we jump onto my laptop, we can, I've got a little bit of a demonstration for you. That was my best Patrick LeBlanc impression. It was pretty terrible. So it's for once, Microsoft have got naming like down to a T. People forever complaining about Microsoft giving their features terrible names. Explore pretty much does what you think it's going to do. So for any given published data set, you can explore the data, and effectively what that does is it just fires up a matrix view inside the Power BI service, and rather than just presenting the metadata about the data sets, rather than just listing out what the names of the fields are and what the data types and things like that, actually lets you drag data into it so that you can start to explore and see not just the descriptions of the data, but what data is actually in there. So that, I guess, if you are finding a data set for the first time and you're not quite sure what to expect, you can get a little bit of a preview. Tons of other new features going on in the service as well. Every month in the visualization section, we get a bit of a roundup around all the custom visuals too. So there's another little update for you there, and then just a few other in the others section as well. So data engineering lands, Synapse.
Yes. Yeah, so there's quite a few interesting ones in here. So kicking off with the data warehouse side of things, we've got some query insights, so just a little bit more visibility of what's happening under the hood when you're executing queries. It's starting to bring us some of those features that were that we saw in Synapse, some of the features that we would maybe be more familiar with from a SQL Server perspective. Full DML to Delta Lake logs, just improving the kind of logging on the data warehousing side. An interesting one here is the automatic data compaction for Fabric Warehouse. Now, some people might not agree with me when I say that's an interesting one, but it's interesting because when you dig into it, essentially what that's doing in the background, if you're familiar with Optimize, if you're coming from Databricks Spark, we're basically trying to improve the files underneath. So as we make lots of transactions with our Delta files, we're creating lots of small files with all of those kind of changes, and that's compacting them all together to reduce our footprint and also make things a little bit more performant.
I was going to say,
interestingly,
faster.
Yeah. So you'll see performance improvements, but quite interesting how this potentially impacts time travel, which I'm going to come on to in a second. But I assume this potentially lines up with that kind of default time travel span that we'll see in a second. So something to be aware of, something to potentially look into if you're kind of thinking about those Delta benefits of being able to time travel quite far into the past with your Delta files. Few kind of fairly standard ones: improvements to CSV data ingestion, multi-terabyte results for warehouses, some performance improvements, some things that are a bit easier to do. Again, I mentioned the time travel component, so being able to time travel through your data. So this is a Delta functionality or a Delta feature. But what they've done within Fabric is just, or this Fabric warehouse experience, is just really make that a little bit simpler to use, a little bit easier. So it allows you to take clones of tables that you have that isn't actually moving any data or copying any data out. But that's allowing you to do that up to a default of 7 days at the moment. So we've got a default retention period of 7 calendar days. So I think that lines up quite well with that data compaction component that we looked at a second ago.
Okay.
And kind of gives us that 7 days. So as you're ingesting data and building it up, that automatic compaction will bring that history up to that 7-day point, compressing the files, making them into bigger Parquet files, and just basically continually improving the performance. So few pieces here around SQL package support, so we can create DAC packs from inside Fabric and things like that, which is pretty interesting. One of the other ones is dynamic data masking for Fabric warehouses and SQL analytics endpoints. So this is essentially a really great enhancement, a really great feature if you are familiar with this coming from like a SQL Server perspective, just giving you a bit more control of your data and being able to mask that and control the security around it within Fabric. So that's some good functionality coming over.
That's good for things like controlling PII data, things like that. We have a lot of clients who don't want things like that personally identifiable data to be visible to users. So, am I barking up the right tree there in terms of what that's going to do?
Yeah. So there's not a lot of information on it here, but yeah, it allows you to kind of maintain that privacy of the data. Without actually changing anything under the hood. So a few other things here. There's the runtime 1.2, which has been talked about quite a bit as it's kind of coming out of October and going into November, which is quite interesting. Brings Delta Lake 2.4 and also Spark 3.4. And with it, the second point there is brings the multiple runtime support. So basically allowing us to actually define the runtime that we're using within a workspace. Now that is at the workspace level, so that's something to bear in mind. If you're changing that and there's any significant changes or feature changes between versions, you just need to be aware that that's changing everything at the workspace level for what it's using.
That sounds like that could be quite a good one for like when the runtime is updated. Though you could, if you've got say a pre-prod environment, maybe run your runtime in pre-prod, and if that all works for you, then you can switch on that runtime in your production environments. Yeah,
it does kind of make that functionality a bit easier, so that you're changing it in one place and it applies to everything within that workspace. So yeah, it makes the process flow a little bit simpler. One of the interesting ones here, which I'll be a little bit critical around, is Delta is the default table format in the new runtime 1.2. Kind of would have assumed that Delta would be the default table format already, but
yeah, I thought
that. at least we have that now. And it means if you don't define that you want to use Delta, if you don't define that table format, it will just automatically save as Delta under the hood, which is what we want. We don't want, and I've made this mistake a few times, we don't want accidental just spitting things out as Parquet under the hood. So that is a good one to see. Quite a few other bits and pieces here I don't want to spend too much time going into. Intelligent cache, a monitoring hub for Spark enhancements. So there's a lot of kind of monitoring components in there as well that have been added within the monitoring hub inside Fabric. So it just basically allows you to dive into what's happening with your notebooks, what's happening with your lake houses and things, gives you a little bit more visibility. Again, we have another one of these REST API supports for the Spark job definition, which is great. And also for Lakehouse artifacts to load to tables and for table maintenance as well. So lots of functionality under that REST API component, which is really good.
Awesome.
One that I do want to point out is the Lakehouse support for Git integration and deployment pipelines. And that also applies to one just a little bit further down, which is the notebook Git integration as well. So if I jump over to Fabric, we can see in here, so I've got this connected to source control already. And if you've done this already, you would probably see some of these components where you have Power BI reports or a Power BI semantic model and it's showing as synced, whereas everything else in your workspace is showing as unsupported. Yeah. So if you've not seen it before, you can set this up from workspace settings. If you go to Git integration, from here, I can basically set the organization, and this is currently just limited to Azure DevOps, but I would imagine, given the kind of proximity of use, we'd see this for GitHub at some point in the near future as well. So I've connected up my Azure DevOps project. I've pointed it to a Git repository, and then I've set a little folder in there as well. And that's connected me up to source control. So I can now use that source control functionality against my lake houses and against notebooks as well. So if I was to come in here to a notebook and if I just add a couple more returns here and do test, I'll leave that alone. And if I come back to my workspace, we can now see I've got an uncommitted change against that notebook. So going up to source control, I can see that change. I can select it. I can add a message. Like all of my commit message, this is going to be a meaningful message. And then I can commit those changes. Yeah. So all of those kind of changes to notebooks are now tracked in source control, which is brilliant. It kind of really enhances that developer experience. Where I'm changing names of my lake house artifacts or changing other components within it, those changes will also be logged. So that definition of each of my lake houses will be logged to Git source control as well. So that was my most exciting pieces. And certainly we've got REST APIs for notebooks as well. So we've got more REST API components that are definitely worth exploring.
I You're missing one of the best new features though, Craig, in the engineering workloads.
Yeah,
You have a Power BI
this
report in a notebook.
just glossed right over that one, Johnny.
How dare you? I'm pretty sure this used to exist in Synapse, though I can't say I've actually used it before. But yeah, from that kind of creating a notebook perspective and having that integration, being able to use Power BI, the Power BI client via a Python package in notebooks is just another great way for people, especially doing exploratory work. Gives you those sort of nice, rich graphics that Power BI can do in a kind of data sciencey, Pythony type environment. So that's pretty cool.
Moving into actually there was one small piece I wanted to cover as well, is environments. I don't know if anyone has seen this within their Fabric tenant or pop up in any of their lists when you're creating a new item. But environment is basically a way where we can start to get a little bit more granular control over what we're doing with each of our workspaces and how we progress our code and our changes and our artifacts between each workspace. So it gives us the ability to set like custom libraries. It gives us the ability to pull down specific libraries for specific workspaces, and also define the Spark compute that we're going to be using. So if I set up a development environment, I can say like this environment uses these specific things. I want the compute to be quite small because it's just development. I want these public libraries. I want our custom libraries that we use for testing and things like that in the background, and they're going to be most relevant to this development environment. And I can define this all in here, which I can then export as YAML, or I can import a new one that will define that as well. Okay, so yeah, environments, another one to keep an eye on, and that's definitely something that we will loop into when we talk about the CI/CD process and how you would progress all your code through each environment within Fabric. So one I did want to cover, which I would argue kind of sits within the data engineering component, but it's listed out here under data science, is Copilot in notebooks. So if you've not had a play about with this yet, it is quite interesting. It's quite fun to use. I can do a quick run through just now. So if you are wanting to play with it, you do need to have at least an F64 capacity there. So yeah, this is definitely one that I want to demonstrate and take a little bit of a deeper look at. So if we come over to Fabric, I've got a notebook that's already open here. And when you click the Copilot button, it'll open this sidebar here, which you can't really see. So I'll switch me and Johnny over to the other side.
Cool.
And that opens up that sidebar, and it also adds this initial cell to your notebook. So we need to bring in a Python wheel there just so that we've got all the things under the hood that are needed for us to run and use Copilot. So once that's ran, we've got a couple of suggestions on what we want to do with our data and what we want to do in this notebook. I can click on one of these and it actually just creates that prompt for me, or I can write my own prompt. And let's just say we want to bring in the mention stock item table. And once you hit that, it goes away, it's working on it, it's going to create the code that I need to use. And it's going to give me a little bit of detail on what it's trying to do here, or what it's doing to basically explain it. So it's not just doing the usual of like, here's the code, no idea what it does, go away and just run it. It's going to tell you, it's going to give you a little bit of information and kind of guide you along a little bit as well. Yeah. So if I scroll up, it's got the code here for me that I can just literally just insert code. I could copy paste it if I want, but why do all the work when I can just get Copilot to do it? It brings that in as a new cell. It does add that this is AI generated code, so just be careful, know what you're doing, just check it before you run it, essentially, like we all do with Stack Overflow code snippets. And then it gives a little bit of an explanation saying, yeah, that first line initializes the reading process by calling the read method on the Spark object, blah, blah, blah. So it's explaining what it's doing as well. So there's quite a few things under the data science banner here, and definitely we'll need to get one of our awesome data science team on advancing Fabric for them to kind of go through that. We'll drag Gavi in here, and she can go into a lot more detail of some of these things and where we're starting to see that data science experience expanding within Fabric.
Sure, we have to try it, Craig. I'm sure she'll be like positively enthusiastic about joining Advancing Fabric.
Well, I've thrown her under the bus now anyway. We've got real-time analytics. Is there anything that's jumping out for you in this one?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got to admit to the fact that all my Fabric use cases to date have been a little bit more around that sort of batch-driven type thing, sort of traditional workload. So I haven't spent as much time as I've wanted in real-time analytics, but I've definitely sort of kept half an eye out on what's going on there. I think that very first one, Delta Power K support in KQLDB, is a really interesting one. So those streams originally went into a K. How do you say KQL? Is it KQL? Because I say SQL instead of SQL. I like to say KQL. It just makes me want to eat cake. But I'm going to go with it. If no one else is calling it KQL, we will pioneer KQL. So KQLDB, for those event streams, originally was going into a KQL database, or what used to be Data Explorer, and now you can effectively sync it straight into OneLake in Delta Power K format. So the idea of it being like one logical copy, which the feature talks about here, there is this idea that what you're going to be able to do, if you can stream directly into OneLake, that means you can pick it up using Direct Lake and those kind of like real-time analytics use cases in terms of getting it into things like Power BI. There's me straight away, jumped on the Power BI use case again. Yeah, being able to build up those hybrid workloads, maybe some things are going to be batch driven into your lake, maybe some things can be streamed almost near real time. It's all going to land in the same place in the same format, and you're going to be able to consume it via one means. So
moving into data factories, looking at the data flows side of things, some interesting little announcements here. So general availability of some of the connectors that we've got in there. That's worth looking at. We've got refresh cancellation, some stuff around the SAP HANA connector as well. One of the interesting ones, which I'm a little bit half disappointed that it is just on the data flow Gen 2 side, because I am data pipelines through and through, is the support for VNet gateways. So this is starting to pave the way for us to get that on-premises connectivity and get connectivity with VNet secured data sources where we have storage accounts behind private endpoints and things like that. So this starts to open that up, and it's taking us down that route of using that VNet data gateway to enable that connectivity. So that's quite interesting. Just relevant to the data flow Gen 2 part at the moment though.
Yeah, so those VNet gateways were something that were in preview last year, I think, for Gen 1 data flows and for Power BI data gateways. So I have played about with those a bit, and they're relatively straightforward to set up. But as you say, to be able to get Fabric workloads using those VNet gateways is great. And just hurry up and get it into pipelines. The best one in this data factory announcement, here's me jumping on the engineering stuff again, but this staging artifacts will be hidden is fantastic, because I did a blog earlier in the year around naming conventions in Fabric, and basically one of the reasons it made sense to have a really good naming convention is because those workspaces get so cluttered. You've got you've got engineering experiences, data science experiences, data factory, and Power BI, and everything gets really, really quite muddled up. And amongst that was the fact that for some artifacts or some items, it would just auto-generate things that you didn't even want to use. They were just sort of enabling features that really sat under the hood that you didn't really even want to see. If you ever created a data flow, you'd get this staging warehouse and staging lakehouse, and they were just annoying. And now I'm pretty sure they're still there, but you don't see them.
Going on to the pipeline component, There's not been a great deal of significant things landing. Unfortunately, we've got some cross workspace save as. You'd mentioned this one, Johnny, that you were quite interested in it, I think.
Yeah, so obviously you talked earlier about the Git integration and being able to sync your content into a Git repository, and that's great because then you can deploy it across different workspaces. As it stands currently, Data Factory isn't included in that. You don't get Git integration with Data Factory.
Yeah.
And it is so annoying because we've been working on a project internally where we've got a development workspace and then we've got a production workspace, and we're now ready to move our pipelines into production, and we just have to build them from scratch, which is annoying. Now, full Git integration would be better, but you can at least now do a save as. So if you've written a pipeline in your development workspace, you need to move it to production, you can right click, save as, and then just save it to a different workspace. So an improvement, hopefully not the end of the journey, but yeah, definitely good for that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what I'm starting to see now, with certainly in pipelines, I'm finding it most obvious within pipelines, is starting to build up that feature parity with Azure Data Factory. So we're starting to get some of the features that bring us up into what Azure Data Factory can do, which is great. I mean, like, it's great that we're going to be able to get the same features that are in Data Factory, and some of these things are just kind of chipping away at it, which is good. So we are at the end of the list, and there's one here that you wanted to mention as well, right at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Cloud Skills Challenge. Now, I guess historically during sort of Ignite time of the year, quite often there've been Cloud Skills challenges, and that sort of encourages you to go through some of the learning material that Microsoft have produced. You might sometimes get some kind of reward from that in terms of possibly they used to give away free certifications at the end of it, which I don't think they are doing this time around. But where it is relevant in terms of sort of getting into that skills challenge is the fact that they have also announced a Fabric certification. So there's going to be the Analytics Engineer Associate, I think is what it's going to be called, and the exam of the DP600. So if you're looking to kind of prove that you know what you're talking about when it comes to Fabric, the certification is now there so that you can kind of test your skills and then validate your skills as well. It's currently in beta. I don't think it's even actually been released. I think you can start actually taking the exam for that from January onwards. But certainly if that is something you're interested in doing, going through this Cloud Skills Challenge is going to be a great way to get yourself prepared for that. So yeah, 100% recommend checking that out. The Microsoft Learn material is fantastic.
Yeah, that'll be a good one to take a look at, and certainly to take those Fabric skills that everyone's building up and just be able to capture them within that certification.
Are you going to do it, do you think, Craig? Do you think as the chief fabricator you have to, or is it just implied by your chief status?
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure there. Yeah. I'll take the beta exam. I might not share the outcome.
Cool.
But yeah, so there's a lot of news within that November roundup, and there's a lot that we didn't actually cover. So if there's anything that's in there that you see as being super important or that you're really interested in, then yeah, stick a mention in the comments. Certainly something that we can look into, and we can explore in another video.
Yeah, I can't believe if we actually got to the end of that, it was absolutely epic. And then bearing in mind that particular blog we've been through came out during Ignite as well, I was like, whoa.
Yes.
So brilliant, cool. All the fabricators that have made it to the end of the video, thanks ever so much for watching. I'm glad you made it to the end. If you have not already, please do like and subscribe if you want to follow along for more news and updates about Fabric from myself and Craig. You can also follow us wherever people can be followed. So check us out on LinkedIn. We are on Twitter or X, if that's what you prefer. We're even on Instagram. So yeah, do check us out if you want to know more about advancing analytics and how we can help you with Fabric. We're on advancinganalytics.co.uk as well. So thanks once again for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Until next time.